It's all very extreme. What I liked about writing the report is that I got to go all the way back to track the descent into the realm of just ideologically driven pseudo medicine and the complete abandonment of the Hippocratic Oath. You can see it occurring. And so I use the words of WPATH members as a framework around which to build the entire story of WPATH. Because the conversations were so broad ranging, they gave me the opportunity to talk about what I think is important for people to know about WPATH with the history woven in. And then my favorite part is obviously the comparing to past medical scandals. I loved that I had that opportunity because that's my thing.
Yeah, that is your niche.
It's my thing.
Where do you start with the story then?
What I chose was obviously lobotomies. So I'm talking about like sticking ice picks in through the eye socket, wiggling them around, destroying a person's humanity as a means to cure a psychiatric disorder, comparing it to surgical attack on the genitals, which is another core part of what makes us human. Our sexual identities are really important. And so there's the comparison there. My favorite case study is the ovariotomy. So this was the medical scandal in the 19th century where they were removing healthy ovaries as a means to cure mental illness in women, totally pseudoscientific, based on reflex theory, which is one organ could create symptoms in another organ in the body. There's no science to it whatsoever, but it's the 19th century. And I compare that to the attack on women's reproductive organs and their breasts now. It's a good parallel because women in the 19th century were actually imbibing the narrative of reflex theory. And then they were fixating on their ovaries, their healthy ovaries, as the source of their mental distress. So then they would show up and ask surgeons to remove their healthy ovaries. And some would, after the fact, say that they were cured. It's totally placebo. It's power of the mind. There was no link whatsoever. And of course, it's just like now. The teenage girls and young women, they become fixated on their secondary sex characteristics as the source of their mental distress. And all they have to do is get a surgeon to remove them and they'll be cured. It's the same thing. And it's even the same because if you opposed ovariotomy, you were accused of wanting in humanity. That's a direct quote. Like those who were opposed to this surgery were wanting in humanity. They were bad people. It's us, right? We're all wanting in humanity because we think it's wrong to chop the healthy breasts off a 16-year-old lesbian. They say, right, like history doesn't repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. I mean, I think that's attributed to Mark Twain, but I don't know if he actually said it. So there's that one, which is that aspect of it. And then, of course, I have to talk about the amputees, apotemnophilia, the people who want their healthy limbs amputated, normally just one limb. And it's a fixation. And they, you know, if you dig into that literature, you feel like you're reading the literature on gender medicine. Like there are people in there who are basically saying, I feel as though I'm born in the wrong body. I should have been born into the body of an amputee. I don't feel whole with 4 limbs. You know, I want like a lower leg 2 inches below the knee. They're very specific about the amputation that they want. And of course, it's the removal of healthy body parts. It becomes an obsession. It takes over the life, which again, there's a lot of that going on. I compare that to the non-binary surgeries because to me, that is surgeons creating body types that do not exist in nature. And they use that phrase in the WPATH files. There's a guy in there, a surgeon, who's saying, you know, I've treated people who are eunuchs. We're creating the first of their kind surgeries, and we're creating body types that do not exist in nature. They see themselves as being on this new frontier of medicine. The apotemnophilia one is really interesting. I tried to find evidence that there are surgeons who will amputate healthy limb. Like I've written about it before, the surgeon in Scotland in the 1990s he performed leg amputations on 2 men, was set to do another one, big scandal, and the hospital closed the whole experiment down because of the negative media attention. I couldn't find anyone who will publicly at least advertise or say that they will amputate a healthy leg. And yet you've got gender doctors all over the place advertising nullification and bigenital surgeries, which have a much more detrimental impact on the body. If one is a violation of medical ethics, why is the other not? This one is far worse. The non-binary one is far worse. And then there's the hormone therapy. with the correcting the
Yeah.
height of tall girls and short boys, which the obvious parallel is it's pediatric endocrinology. But you combine all four of those, and then you add in the most insane rights movement in all of history, and you've got today's medical scandal. And at the center of it sits WPATH. They are the ones who have unleashed this upon us.
What happens next for you?
I don't have another project on the go. There are things that I want to write about. Part of the report, because I went into regret and the inadequacy of self-report as a measure of the outcome for these patients. Like, sure, they all say they're happy, but that's, there's a powerful psychological impulse there to not admit to yourself that you regret it. And kind of obsessed with the intersection of trends and tech. I was reading about the glass delusion. I was reading about the cement delusion and all these delusions that have evolved, these mad moments where psychiatric disorders have arisen with technological advances. And then this is what sparked it. So I was in DC last month and I got an Uber, and in the Uber, it just so happened to be this radio segment of a guy who had found his woman's soul and been inspired to transition after playing around with Face app. And it wasn't a joke. It was for real. Like, this was this inspiring story about this guy turned himself into a woman on this app and then actually gone down the medical route and had fully transitioned. And it gave me the idea that I really want to dig into this, the influence of technology on people's desire to transition and how technology has influenced all of these crazy moments in the past as well, like the glass delusion, which is one of my favorites.
What's that?
So the glass delusion, it was started by 15th century French King Charles VI or something. The man was definitely not psychologically stable. He had some mental health issues. At the time, glass had been around for like 1,000 years or something in some form or another, but there had just been this new type of glass invented, and it was clear, and people were kind of obsessed with this new type of glass, and the French had invented it. And so this guy has something of a psychological breakdown and becomes convinced that he's made of glass. And so, he's wrapping himself in cushions and everything, and people can't touch him. They have to stay away because if they touch him, he'll shatter and break into a million pieces. And so what's interesting is he triggered something of a psychiatric epidemic of glass men, people believing themselves to be made of glass. Yeah. And it went on for quite some time. It went on. There's even, I recall reading a book that I love, Middlesex, which is anyway, it's a very famous book. And in that book, I'm quite sure there's some sort of Greek military commander in the 1920s who also was convinced that he was made of glass. So it somewhat endured. These things never really disappear. Yeah. They have their trigger. Yeah. They have their moment. And then they they remain with us at all times. But, this was just because they invented a new type of glass, and it seeped into the mind that was on the brink of madness. And then it triggered a social contagion of glass men.